Amazing pilot exposes shocking injustice. Discover how she transformed her airline in just 30 days. The airport lounge buzzed with life, a sea of travelers lost in their own worlds, boarding calls, laughter, the scent of coffee. Yet, as Sarah Mitchell stood by the window, her heart felt heavy, a lead weight anchoring her down. At 32, she was a skilled airline pilot, a dreamer turned doer, yet today everything felt like it was slipping through her fingers. Scanning the room, she caught whispers from former colleagues who eyed her with a mixture of pity and distaste. A call from HR had just informed her that her position was at risk, not because of her flying skills, she was one of the best, but due to the biases that lurked in the shadows of corporate politics. The realization twisted painfully in her stomach. The world she loved was closing in on her because she was a single mother. This dilemma gnawed at her. Could she remain true to her dream without sacrificing her role as a mother? Thoughts raced through her mind, each one more chaotic than the last. She remembered her grandfather's tales of flying through storm clouds, of navigating through turbulence, each story instilling in her a sense of determination. But now, it felt like those clouds were closing in fast, and she was losing the battle. What kind of pilot would she be if she let her child down? The shadows of doubt whispered taunts, reminding her that she didn't fit their outdated mold of success. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Her internal battle intensified as she pieced together her circumstances. The pressure from executives to present a pristine public image had resulted in talented professionals being sidelined, their potential squandered for the sake of optics. A surge of anger rose within her. Why should she have to dim her light? Why was being both a pilot and a mother perceived as a conflict? As these thoughts crystallized, a burning desire to act ignited her resolve. But would anyone support her? The messages over the past weeks had felt isolating, and with every delay, the walls around her seemed to tighten. Yet amidst the despair, a flicker of hope emerged. A retired captain had approached her, recognizing her plight from afar. He had seen the vested interests in the company wanting to keep her down. Together, they crafted a plan, using her undeniable skills and passion to draw attention to their plight. But time was running out, and as whispers became louder, threatening to drown out her resolve, the weight of betrayal compounded her fear. What if she did all this for nothing? What if she ended up alone and unemployed, the very dreams she fought for slipping away? Standing on the edge of desperation, Sarah prepared herself for what lay ahead. Her final attempt to shoot through the turbulence of bias and injustice awaited. In those critical moments, she realized that the stakes had never been higher. With her future, and the dreams of countless other women, hanging precariously in the balance, she steeled herself for the showdown. Would she rise above the Habanar or succumb to the storm? Gripping the edge of her resolve, she took a deep breath, readying herself for the fight that could define her life. The morning sun streamed through the office blinds, casting stripes of light across Sarah's desk as she prepared for an all-important meeting. The burden of doubt still clung to her like a second skin, but she was resolved to break free. With every tick of the clock, her mind flashed back to the retired captain's words. Sometimes, to fly high, you need to confront the storm head-on. Shoo! Those echoes fueled her as she ran through her plans for the meeting, her pulse racing with the urgency of the moment. Glimmers of hope shone through waves of anxiety. Over the past few days, she'd reached out to other women in the aviation industry, fellow pilots, engineers, and even dispatchers to gather their stories and validate her own. Each response had a common theme. They too had felt the weight of systemic biases pressed down on them. The knowledge that she was not alone shifted something within her. If others shared the same struggle, maybe she could strengthen their voices along with hers. Thoughts of her daughter jumped in, a reminder of why she was fighting so fiercely. Each time she caught a glimpse of the little girl with sparkling eyes and dreams that reached the sky, Sarah felt her resolve harden. This wasn't just about her job, it was about paving a way for her daughter's future, a way that would scream that women could soar unburdened by societal expectations. As she gathered her notes and rehearsed her presentation, her instincts kicked in. She couldn't just collect stories. She needed to present them in a manner so captivating that executives would feel compelled to listen, no, to act. She envisioned the meeting room, her colleagues seated around the polished table, skepticism woven into their expressions. But she wasn't afraid. With each detail, she meticulously crafted. From emotional anecdotes to statistical data, she was ready to expose the injustices she had endured and the experiences of others like her. When Sarah entered the meeting room, she could feel the atmosphere shift. It was now or never. As she launched into her presentation, her voice carried conviction. She framed her own struggles against the backdrop of broader systemic issues, interweaving the tales of her colleagues. Each narrative she shared added weight to her argument, turning individual battles into a collective fight for equality. But even as she spoke, doubts lingered. What would be the response? Would the executives validate her experiences, or would they dismiss her as another outspoken employee? As Sarah closed her presentation, she couldn't shake the tension that hung in the air. Would they recognize the truth of the stories she shared, or would the fear of change stifle their willingness to listen? In the aftermath, silence enveloped the room, an oppressive curtain that threatened to choke her neatly structured arguments. Then, unexpectedly, one of the senior executives broke the silence. "Thank you for sharing your passion with us today," he began, his tone measured but curious. "It takes courage to shine a light on uncomfortable truths. I'd like to discuss how we can address these issues moving forward." Encouragement mingled with uncertainty. She had initiated a dialogue, but would it hold real weight? As the meeting concluded and her colleagues filed out, Sarah felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration coursing through her. Yet amid the tentative optimism, a deeper question loomed in her mind. Was this just the beginning of her fight? The prospect of genuine change felt both exhilarating and daunting. With her heart racing, another realization struck her. What if her own journey was a blueprint for other women? Driven by newfound determination, Sarah made a choice. She would not only fight for herself, but also become an advocate for her sisters in aviation. As she stepped out of the room, ready to face the unknown challenges ahead, the undeniable truth settled in. The moment had come to dig deeper, to push beyond the tipping point. But would her voice resonate beyond the boardroom, compelling others to join her in the fight for justice? The days that followed the meeting unfolded with a mixture of hope and pressure weighing upon Sarah. Each afternoon she found herself returning to her desk with fresh thoughts, determination bubbling within her. Yet an undercurrent of trepidation persisted. The message had landed, but what would the follow-up bring? She sensed the momentum building, and this charged energy propelled her forward. Inspired by the executive's encouraging response, she began drafting emails to fellow women in aviation, inviting them to come together. Instead of reaching out solely for stories, she sought a deeper connection, establishing a network where their experiences could form a foundation for change. She envisioned a collaborative project that would leverage the collective strength of women in her field, transforming shared narratives into actionable insights that she hoped could influence company policies. However, doubts nagged at her. How could she, a mid-level employee, enact change in an entrenched corporate structure? Could mere words truly dismantle long-standing bias? Yet this very uncertainty reminded her of a lesson the retired captain had instilled in her. Change often started small, but required an unyielding spirit to break through barriers. The urgency of her new mission sharpened her focus, but it also unveiled blind spots within herself. For years, Sarah had been careful, highlighting her professional achievements, conforming to expectations. Now, she realized the importance of embracing her vulnerabilities. This disclosure could embolden others to step forward alongside her. The potential empowerment sparked a newfound excitement in her. One afternoon, as she persevered through proposals and contacts, a thought struck her. What if she organized a roundtable discussion? Bringing together female employees of various ranks could incite dialogue, revealing nuanced perspectives that the management could no longer ignore. This idea set her mind ablaze. Sarah quickly outlined her vision, identifying key contributors from the network she was starting to build. As she reached out to logistics and scheduled meetings, her heart raced with anticipation. The room required an atmosphere of trust and safety, a space where candid conversations could flourish. Juggling a demanding job and mothering a young daughter left little room in her already tight schedule, but this initiative felt too significant to postpone. Each step toward realization solidified her belief that she was moving in a vital direction. Meanwhile, the impending discussions loomed over her like an impending storm. She prepared meticulously for every possible objection or question that might arise. From historical data to personal anecdotes, nothing was off the table. She envisioned the faces around the table, each expressing skepticism, curiosity, or validation. Would they stand with her or against her? The upcoming gathering ignited an electric mix of anxiety and exhilaration within her. She could almost hear the echoes of their struggles in her mind, fueling her resolve to articulate their collective frustration. As she sat in her office preparing the presentation materials, her phone beeped with a new message from one of her closest allies in the network. It was a concern about potential pushback from the upper management. This forced her to confront her own feelings. Was she prepared to face hostility? Would she be branded as a disruptor? Heart thumping, Sarah acknowledged the risks. Yet she also recognized that without acknowledging the tension, change would remain elusive. Days passed quickly. The round table approached with a strange mix of urgency and anticipation. The confrontation that lay ahead was palpable. As she looked at her reflection in the window, she thought, the time had come to face the storm. But, paradoxically, it was not only the board or the executive she had to confront, it was also a part of herself, the part that still feared drawing attention for speaking out. Would she summon the courage needed for this pivotal moment? As the dawn of that day emerged, all her doubts boiled down to one taut question. Could she navigate the winds of change and emerge unburdened? The answer lingered just beyond her grasp, twisting into a promise she was determined to keep. The morning arrived, cloaked in a haze of trepidation that mirrored Sarah's internal state. The day had arrived for the round table. The assembly of voices she had long been cultivating would soon coalesce into a singular force. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing against her chest, reminding her of the stakes involved. Not only was she advocating for change, but she also bore the collective hopes of every woman in aviation who had ever felt sidelined. It was time to transform unspoken struggles into a robust dialogue. Arriving early at the conference room, she meticulously arranged the seating to encourage open communication. She chose a circular layout, a choice laden with significance. No hierarchies, just equal voices in pursuit of a shared goal. As she placed name cards, her fingers trembled, and she chastised herself for letting anxiety creep in. This was her moment. She needed to embody courage, embody the belief she wanted the others to share. She breathed deeply, invoking the imagery of the retired captain's unwavering spirit. This was the very essence of leadership that she aspired to replicate. Soon, the attendees began to filter in. Each woman brought with her a unique experience. Some had faced blatant discrimination. Others had experienced subtle biases that chipped away at their potential. Sarah could see flickers of camaraderie ignite amongst them, a collective understanding gradually taking shape. As the meeting commenced, Sarah struggled initially with her nerves. She quickly glanced at the agenda she had prepared. Structure would provide needed reassurance. Thank you for gathering today. Each of you holds a unique perspective that matters, and it's essential for us to vocalize those experiences, she began, projecting her voice with newfound authority. Her heart raced, but each word that flowed boosted her confidence. The conversations unfolded organically. Stories of triumph surfaced alongside accounts of frustration and individuality that resonated deeply within the room. Yet as the dialogue deepened, so did an undercurrent of tension. Some women expressed fears about retaliation, reminding Sarah that the corporate climate still bore the fingerprints of resistance against voices like theirs. Critical questions began to echo in her mind. Was the conversation intended to stir anger, or was it striving for constructive change? Halfway through the session, a senior executive entered the room unexpectedly, her presence eliciting a momentary silence that felt like a razor's edge. Sarah's heart sank. Had someone alerted upper management? Just as her thoughts spiraled, the executive took a seat, cross-armed but attentive. "Please continue," she said, her tone softening the formal power dynamic momentarily. Sarah knew this was an opportunity. Tension now mingled with determination as she faced the sudden shift. "Today, we're sharing what we feel and what needs to change," she stated resolutely, both confronting and engaging the presence of authority. A palpable shift occurred. The courage of the women around her fortified her own resolve. As they delved deeper into examples of bias and exclusion in the workplace, moments of vulnerability began to emerge. Sarah noticed when one participant shared her story of having been overlooked for a promotion solely based on gender. The invisible thread connecting their struggles grew stronger. Each woman nodded in understanding, and Sarah felt a swell of solidarity. Stories transformed from isolated tragedies into unified demands for change. As the discussion took a decisive turn toward actionable steps, Sarah's vision blossomed wider. Advocacy for mentorship programs, policy reviews, and diversity training became flesh and blood goals. With each idea floated, she felt emboldened, transforming her early apprehension into fierce determination. But amid the rising tides of enthusiasm, a voice of doubt punctured her clarity. "Are you really ready to challenge those at the top?" another woman asked, her brow furrowed. "What if they reject our ideas?" The question hung heavily in the air, igniting a fear that crept back into the room. "What if this is a waste of time?" flashed through Sarah's mind, the shadows of previous failures hovering just out of reach. In response, Sarah paused, contemplating that moment of vulnerability before rallying her thoughts into something powerful. "We have to take this leap together. Change doesn't happen without challenging the status quo. If not us, then who? If not now, then when?" The words hung in the air, resonating within the hearts and minds of everyone present. It was a pivot. To embrace the very fear that had once undermined her confidence had ignited a wave of resolve that could push against the barriers surrounding their workplace. As voices rose to express newfound resolutions amidst a sense of community, Sarah's heart soared. The storm that had loomed over her now shifted, awaiting a new dawn. But just as clarity emerged, her phone buzzed insistently from the table, another message from the ally who had warned about pushback. Anxiety surged through her, threatening to dilute the momentum they had built. What awaited her if they succeeded? Would corporate culture heed their calls, or would it retaliate ferociously to protect its well-worn comforts? Inside Sarah, a battle raged. She stood poised between her emerging identity as a leader and the visceral fear of the unknown. The moment of truth loomed closer with every heartbeat. The electric charge in the room was palpable as Sarah glanced down at her buzzing phone. The screen illuminated her ally's anxious message. The words echoed like a siren in her head. Reality hung heavier than ever, sharpening her focus. Could she really confront the entrenched mindset that had silenced so many voices? She had ignited a flame of determination within herself and her peers, but she felt the icy grip of doubt clawing at the edges of her resolve. "Let's not lose this momentum," Sarah urged, her voice steadying as she redirected the group's attention. "Our experiences are not simply complaints. They are the foundation for actionable change. We cannot scatter now." The palpable energy rejuvenated her. Each woman's eyes reflected the flicker of hope, yet there resided within them a potential storm. As they resumed discussing actionable strategies, a surprising sense of possibility formed in the air. Each contribution transformed into a piece of a collective puzzle. Sarah felt the weight of her responsibility transform into a source of strength. They brainstormed mentorship programs, suggesting names and roles, carving out a space where their voices could thrive. But even as discussions flowed, remnants of Sarah's insecurities resurfaced. Ultimately, the jagged edges of her fears whispered louder now. What if the proposals they crafted were met with scorn? As a leader emerging from the shadows, she could only lean on her collective belief, still unsettled by the impending confrontation with upper management. A decisive thought struck her. This was not merely a dialogue, it was a reckoning. Not only did she carry personal ambitions, but she also bore the weight of generations of women in aviation. The thought quickened her pulse. We have compelling goals. We can and must advocate for ourselves. But as they echoed her sentiments of empowerment, Sarah sensed a rift in the excitement. The executive's presence loomed in her mind, an invisible spectre casting doubt. A chilling question gripped her. Would this newfound alliance survive the scrutiny above? How would she navigate the inevitable backlash? "All right," Sarah asserted, adopting a more serious tone. "If we go forth with our ideas, we need to prepare for opposition. Our commitment starts with an unbreakable resolve to remain united, regardless of pushback from higher-ups. This is about creating space for all of us." The steadfastness of her intention resonated anew, and one woman amongst them, who had initially displayed doubt, finally spoke up. "What if we hold a mock presentation? We could anticipate questions that might arise and temper our responses." Inspired by each other's creativity, they dove into preparation, adjusting their proposals and wrestling with potential criticisms. As discussions deepened, Sarah felt the growing sense of agency crystallizing. A revelation struck. She was not just their voice, she must also be their sword, ready to engage in this battle. But this realization came with a new question. How would she safeguard herself from faltering when faced with the executives? And what if the perilous truths they unveiled fractured the camaraderie they had built? The continued debate felt lively, each woman contributing unique insights, intertwining their backgrounds with the mission they had forged. Yet, a solitary voice echoed dissent in Sarah's mind. What was the cost of this transformation? Would they be equipped to weather the fallout? With the meeting winding down and plans taking form, a definitive sense of purpose emerged among the women. Sarah stood at the center, fueled by the fires of hope ignited within her. Yet she recognized the formidable journey ahead. The rounds of decision-makers, the probable ridicule, and the inevitable resistance. As they closed with shared commitments, Sarah could not shake the haunting question that lingered on her mind. Could they endure the intensity of scrutiny from powerful forces? What would happen when they finally presented their case? With fire in her heart, she declared, "Tomorrow marks the beginning of our journey. We're stepping into a storm, but we're not stepping in alone." The resolve of her voice surprised her, igniting a deep-seated courage she had only begun to acknowledge. And even through the swelling uncertainty that loomed, her heart raced at the notion of the unknown adventures on the horizon. What awaited them on this precarious path? What truths would emerge as they exposed the injustices hiding in the shadows of their reality? As the meeting adjourned, a familiar pulse of independence surged through her. This battle was only just beginning. The air felt heavy as Sarah walked away from the meeting room. Each step echoed her internal battle, a relentless rhythm of determination shadowed by anxiety. The bold commitments made felt both exhilarating and terrifying. What would happen if they faltered? What if the executives dismissed their ideas outright? The potential fallout loomed over her like a thundercloud, threatening her newfound resolve. In the following hours, Sarah sought refuge in the solitude of her office. The familiar clutter, that mountain of files, the rambling sticky notes, seemed more daunting than ever. She felt the walls pressing in, a reminder of the inhibiting dynamic she had spent years navigating. In this sacred space of panic, she began to craft her speech for the upcoming presentation. With each passing moment, focus turned into obsession. Her words began to flow, but the underlying fear never fully receded. What if her progression into leadership was ill-conceived? What if she was not cut out for this role? The ruminations haunted her as she typed. They were shadows of doubt that threatened to claim her confidence, but deep inside her there flickered a spark, a determination to uncover truth that had begun to take hold of her. She paused, staring at the screen, confronting the discomfort head-on. The path ahead was riddled with uncertainty, yet it also radiated potential. For every woman in that room, she thought of the sacrifices, the muted frustrations echoing through the years, and she knew she could no longer ignore them. With each keystroke, she wrestled with not just her fears, but those of every individual who had ever been ignored. Afternoon turned into evening. As the sunset colors spilled through the window, her focus shifted. She began to visualize the faces of her peers, the hope that sparked in their eyes. They were depending on her, on all of them. This was not merely about policy or proposals. It was about reclaiming their voices, so long suppressed. The weight of their unspoken truths was now her battle to bear. She switched gears, initiating a new document titled Our Vision. It became a focused roadmap to articulate how their passion transformed into actionable goals. The fears that had once paralyzed her began to fuel her ambitions as she carefully crafted points that highlighted not just their struggles, but the solutions born from resilience. The room brightened with purpose. The walls that had felt so stifling now encouraged her spirit of innovation. Finally, in a moment of sudden clarity, she settled on the core of her address. They deserved not just a voice, but recognition and respect. She shifted to a bold font, underlining legacy of voices. In those two words rested all the women who had come before her, and the ones yet to rise. Her hands quaked a bit, and silence enveloped her as she breathed deeply, letting determination wash over her. As midnight approached, tired yet invigorated, she hit save. The culmination of their experiences formed not just a presentation, but a declaration. Yet, doubts still whispered. Would the executives see their vision, or would they dismiss it as mere idealism? With that lingering question, an unexpected sound broke the silence of her office, a notification on her phone, pulling her out of the vortex of thought. It was a text from one of her allies, a supportive message rallying gratitude and excitement for the presentation. Smiling, she felt the spark of community returning, a reminder that she wasn't in this alone. But then came the pressing worry. What if their preparations were still not enough? What if the higher-ups were dismissive despite their collective strength? The next day loomed ahead, her moment of truth. As she prepared for bed, the doubt morphed into anxiety, yet within it lay an ember of tenacity. This was no mere confrontation. It was an awakening. The stakes were high, and in the depths of her heart, she still questioned if she could lead them through the storm waiting just beyond the threshold. Tomorrow they would stand or fall together. Would she rise to the challenge, or would she become a casualty of the scrutiny that awaited? In the early hours of the following day, Sarah sat at her desk, bathed in the sterile glow of fluorescent lights that buzzed persistently overhead. She was caught in a tug-of-war between exhilaration and dread, the impending presentation looming like a tidal wave, ready to sweep away the remnants of her confidence. Her laptop, a portal to the world that awaited her, sat open with legacy of voices boldly displayed, a stark reminder of the hope she had encapsulated in that document. As she sipped her coffee, still lukewarm, she attempted to calm her racing heart. There was a part of her that wished she could retreat back into the safe confines of her mind, where ideas danced freely, devoid of validation or condemnation. But that wasn't a reality anymore, not after she had committed to this path of leadership. Every woman in that room depended on her, and the weight of their aspirations pressed heavily against her chest. Rereading her speech, she questioned whether she had truly captured their essence. Was she merely echoing her own fears in their name? Each line brought forth a myriad of feelings, hope intertwined with frustration. She needed to connect deeply with her audience. They deserved authenticity, not calculation. In that moment she realized that vulnerability could be her greatest asset. A story to ground her message, to make it personal, a way to dismantle the barriers that executives often erected during presentations. The memory of her early career rushed back, reminders of eyes glossing over her suggestions, moments of bruised pride and silent indignation. Those experiences had built her resolve, but they had also left scars. She wanted the executives to see not just numbers or statistics, but the very real impact of their decisions on lives, the faces behind the corporate veil. As the clock clicked closer to presentation time, Sarah felt the first folds of panic starting to coil around her. She stood up abruptly, needing physical movement to spark her determination. Pacing the small office, she rehearsed her speech, allowing the words to flow like water, adapting the narrative to encapsulate her experiences. A narrative unfolded in her mind. Her ups and downs, the camaraderie formed through shared struggles, the unwavering support she had received from her allies. When she returned to the podium, she would not stand alone. She would bring forth their collective story of resilience. Finally, she glanced at the time. Nothing could prepare her for the next hour. This was the moment where self-doubt would either bind her or transform her. The echo of supportive texts from her colleagues resonated in her mind, infusing her with a sense of purpose. "This is not just about you, Sarah," she whispered to herself. "It's about all of us." The waylaid morning morphed into a buzz of anticipation as she approached the conference room. Entering the sterile, jargon-heavy space that had once felt intimidating, she noticed her allies seated in the back, their eyes wide with hope and concern. She concealed her shaking hands behind her notebook, channeling the collective energy of their aspirations. Once positioned in front of the audience, she caught a glimpse of the executive team, stoic faces, intent on dissecting her every word. The silence felt heavy, but she drew strength from the stories she carried within. The moment of truth was upon her, and within that silence she felt the rush of something akin to power. It was her chance to be the voice of transformation. Just as she parted her lips to begin, a fleeting shadow of doubt flickered across her consciousness. What if the vision she had so fervently drafted fell flat? What if the executives dismissed their vision as naive? The possibility of judgment loomed ominously, ready to engulf her. But in that split second, Sarah took a deep breath, realizing that even if she faltered, this was precisely the moment she had prepared for. Whatever the outcome, she would harness the lessons learned and stand tall, undeterred. As the first words escaped her lips, she felt a stirring within her. There was no turning back now. Would she seize this opportunity to elevate not only herself, but everyone who stood quietly behind her? Or would she let this chance slip away the way she had countless others? The rhythm of her heart intensified. Time would reveal everything. The moment Sarah spoke, her voice sliced through the tension in the room, capturing fleeting glances of intrigue among the executives. The narrative she'd crafted began to flow, animated by her passion as she recounted the challenges faced by women in the workplace. Each statistic she shared was married to a story, a life behind the numbers, grounding her message in stark reality. As she spoke, she felt the collective energy shift. The faces of her colleagues in the back row, once tense with expectation, now reflected a shared pride in their identities and aspirations. Sarah's commitment to authenticity resonated. She used pauses strategically, letting the weight of her words hang in the air, creating an undeniable connection with her listeners. For the first time in her career, she was not just a cog in the machine. She was its voice. Yet amidst the thrill of this newfound confidence, another wave of self-doubt crested within her. What if her message was too raw for the polished audience? What if they couldn't hear the authenticity through the corporate jargon that often drowned out individual voices? With each passing moment, Sarah had to rediscover her footing, balancing between personal connection and professional decorum. Her speech surged onward, articulating the need for systemic change, not just for the sake of diversity, but for the enrichment of the company itself. How could they ignore the value of varied perspectives? She observed executives leaning forward, intrigued, and found solace in their nods. Each acknowledgement energized her, propelled her deeper into the heart of her narrative. Describing the burden of carrying fears for her colleagues, the fear of criticism, freezing bold ideas, the fear of inaction, paralyzing progress, Sarah was struck by a revelation as she spoke. Vulnerability wasn't a weakness, but a strength that challenged convention. The air shifted, as though the room itself was requesting more truth, more rawness, more courage. As her presentation concluded, the applause was unexpected and loud, echoing around the room. It filled her with a warmth she hadn't anticipated. But as gratitude washed over her, doubt loomed again. Had she really connected on a deeper level? Was the applause a mere surface reaction, or had she truly sowed the seeds for change? A senior executive approached her, beaming with a mix of admiration and eagerness. "You've given us a lot to think about, Sarah. We need to discuss what comes next," he said, his voice earnest. But beneath the exhilaration of the moment, Sarah's mind ricocheted with the enormity of her words. What did this mean? What commitments would follow? Glimpsing her colleagues, who now wore faces of unguarded hope rather than apprehension, she felt a surge of responsibility engulf her. This was not simply about her presentation or her voice. It was about the path forward, a transformation that would demand unwavering dedication. She realized that whatever came next was crucial, not just for her, but for those who had trusted her to articulate their shared narrative. After the meeting, as the executives returned to their discussions, Sarah's pulse raced at the steps unfolding before her. The outcomes of today's presentation could change the very fabric of how the company engaged with gender equity. Yet, it wouldn't happen by itself. A pivotal decision loomed. Should she dive into the depths of confronting corporate traditions head-on, risking the wrath of those resistant to change, or approach it delicately, treading carefully on corporate eggshells? A storm of implications rattled her thoughts as she stepped out of the room, her heart pounding with anxiety and excitement. She needed to forge a clear plan to navigate this new landscape, but the fear of falling short started to creep back. Yet, in that moment, Sarah recognized her strength, the ability to turn uncertainty into action. The ground was shifting beneath her feet, and as she reached out to those who had supported her, she thought of her next move. Would she lead with unwavering determination, forging ahead with the courage to challenge norms, or would she succumb to the fear of the unknown? With the weight of the future on her shoulders, Sarah made a mental note. It was time to confront not just the reactions of her peers, but her own limitations. The clock's ticking clocked loudly in her ears. Her next step was not just vital, it would define her as the champion her colleagues needed, and as the leader she aspired to become. Determined, Sarah prepared for the next stage of her evolution, her path ahead uncertain yet thrilling. But as she navigated through her thoughts, a nagging question surfaced. What if the real battle lay not in the boardroom, but deep within herself? The following morning, Sarah's days were filled with a frenetic energy. The echoes of her speech from yesterday still reverberated in her mind, fluctuating between elation and trepidation. She grabbed her coffee, but found her usual morning ritual had transformed into a chore. Sipping the dark brew, she felt the weight of a future she scarcely understood settling heavily within her stomach. She needed a plan. The executive's words lingered, promising discussions yet to come. Determined, she moved through the day, meticulously planning her approach, creating a mental map that intertwined personal ambition and a potential sea change for the organization. But the reality of her corporate environment constantly pulled at her ambition. Each interaction with her colleagues seemed laden with unspoken rules, guidelines that boxed her in, made her second-guess the direction she intended to take. She noticed them, the skeptical glances thrown her way, the whispers that traveled through the corridors like currents. The familiar discourse of risk aversion and careful conservatism encircled her, pressing against her resolve. "Do you really think they'll ever change?" Nora, her colleague, challenged during lunch, her brow furrowed as she cut into her salad. "You seemed optimistic today, but the fact is they've been doing things the same way for so long." "The only way to change is to start pushing," Sarah replied, surprising herself with the fervor in her voice. Underneath it all, doubt clutched at her. Was she ignoring the monumental task ahead? What if her colleagues were right? They had navigated these waters longer than she had. The little murmurs of dissent crystallized her fear into sharp focus. What if she failed? And their expectations rested heavy on her shoulders. That evening, Sarah sat down with her laptop, determined to compile the vision she had spoken of. Her fingers danced among the keys as she poured out the initiatives she believed could spearhead real change. Mentorship programs, interdepartmental workshops, and open dialogues about gender nuances in the workplace. As the ideas flowed, she felt invigorated. This was her domain. She was no longer just voicing the discussions, but actively shaping the future narrative. She stopped, rereading her notes, a shiver of excitement creeping in. This was what it meant to take ownership. Yet another wave of uncertainty washed over her. She had to present these ideas in front of the board members whose gaze had sent tremors through her the day before. The thought of presenting was daunting, rekindling the nagging doubt from the previous day's speech. Could she once again stand before the same audience and present something entirely new, something that could very well rock the boat? Sarah wrestled her thoughts. Within the struggle lay her most significant revelation. She needed to shift her perspective. This wasn't just about the presentation, but about inspiring discussion and igniting action. Waking in the middle of the night, her subconscious reignited the oscillating conflicts she'd faced earlier, wrestling with the image of herself heading into that boardroom once more. This time, however, she would not simply be advocating for the women of her company. She would be advocating for her own vision, spearheading a shift in company culture that not only empowered those around her, but would reveal corners of her character she yet needed to uncover. Reaching for her notebook, she began jotting down affirmations, not just for the boardroom, but for herself. I am a catalyst for change. My ideas matter. I challenge conventions. Each statement carved deeper into her resolve, layering her newfound strength with the embrace of vulnerability she had discovered. As the dawn approached, she recognized her next step was vital. She would rally those who believed in her vision to back her efforts. But something stirred inside. What if her rise became a target? What if her ambitions alienated others? The stakes had grown exponentially greater. The moment of truth was drawing near, and Sarah felt fire in her veins, ready to face both her allies and her internal critics. The time had come to not only believe in change, but to embody it. Still, as she prepared for the unfolding journey ahead, that unanswered question echoed incessantly in her mind. Would she emerge victorious, or would self-doubt subvert the potential for her transformative vision? A week later, Sarah stood once more at the precipice of change, but this time, uncertainty had shifted into a solid resolve. The days leading up to her presentation had woven a tapestry of determination colored by countless late nights and fervent discussions with her allies in the burgeoning network of women in aviation. They had coalesced around her vision, amplifying the voices once muffled by bias, and together they had transformed the initiative from concept to concrete proposal. As she approached the boardroom, the chill of the polished glass doors sent a rush of anticipation through her. An air of familiarity hung over the space, yet the urgency felt different now. Today wasn't about fear or hesitation. Today was about the infusion of collective energy. The previous discussions had culminated into a proposal designed to ignite essential conversations about diversity and inclusion. And with each step, she reminded herself of her purpose, to pave the way for future generations of women in aviation. The room seated the same executives, now familiar faces that once seemed intimidating. Yet Sarah had undergone a transformation too. She had risen from the shadows of doubt, burgeoning with the confidence that came from knowing she represented more than just herself. She was the embodiment of hope for many who wished to break free from the constraints of traditional expectations. With a calm inhalation, she positioned herself at the front and began. Thank you for gathering today. What I'm about to share isn't merely about data or policy adjustments. It's about humanity, our humanity. Her voice was steady, her posture unwavering. As she rolled out the compelling statistics and stories collated from conversations with her colleagues, she interspersed her presentation with heartfelt testimonials that painted a vivid picture of their struggles and aspirations. Each narrative resonated, not as isolated incidents, but as interconnected threads woven throughout the fabric of the industry. As she conveyed the core elements of their proposal, mentorship initiatives, training programs, and strategic recruitment, she witnessed a shift amongst the executives. Their initial skepticism faltered as they leaned in, showing interest. One senior executive, whose critical opinions had loomed large in her imagination, finally interjected, "What you're proposing is indeed ambitious. How do you see us implementing the changes you've outlined into our existing frameworks?" In that moment, rather than feeling cornered, Sarah embraced the question as an opportunity to showcase her leadership. Here was a tangible pathway open for dialogue, and she positioned their proposal not just as a critique of the current structure, but a roadmap towards a flourishing future. Implementation requires collaboration across departments. This is not simply about changing policies, but fostering a culture that values diverse perspectives. By investing in continued dialogue, we can ensure these initiatives do not languish as mere words. After a moment of deliberation, Punctuated by contemplative silence, another executive offered, "You've presented an inspiring vision, and I believe there's merit to your proposal. I would like to see a pilot program initiated in tandem with our existing support structures. Your enthusiasm and expertise speak volumes." A wave of relief swept over Sarah, intertwined with exhilaration. They were willing to explore possibilities. As discussions unfolded, she took pride in recognizing the layers of her arc of growth. The quiet pilot, overshadowed by insecurities, now stood before her colleagues confidently, fueled by a shared narrative. They debated potential challenges, but reinforced each necessity with further commitments toward actionable steps. A palpable air of solidarity enveloped the room. With each exchange, Sarah no longer felt the urge to shield herself. She had conquered the doubts that had once accompanied her every thought. During her closing remarks, she acknowledged her peers for their contributions, emphasizing that this movement was a collective endeavor. We're not just changing the dynamics of the organization, we're weaving a legacy that others will aspire to follow. The meeting concluded with spirited resolve. Discussions of terms and next steps filled the air. As Sarah stepped out of the boardroom, the echoes of changing perceptions resonated inside her. She had achieved something monumental, not just for herself, but for all the women who yearned for a space to be seen, heard, and celebrated. Sarah shifted from being an employee at risk of losing her place to a recognized changemaker. Her own journey mirroring the collective aspirations of countless women in aviation. The framework for mentorship programs began to take root almost immediately, ignited by the conversations sparked in that meeting. Outside, as she drew in the crisp air, she caught sight of her daughter with her small, colorful backpack, waiting eagerly for her to come home. In that moment, Sarah felt a profound connection to the future she envisioned for the next generation. A space where they wouldn't just navigate through turbulence, but soar above it. The weight she once carried transformed into wings, and her heart brimmed with pride, not only for her accomplishments, but for the torch she had lit. She would ensure that the skies ahead would be filled with new voices, newly empowered to fight against the biases and boundaries that had once sought to confine them. As she stepped into the world outside, she understood the power of resilience and the importance of community. She had ignited a movement that would ripple through the aviation industry, one that would bear witness to the voices longing for equality. Everyone had their challenges, but here she stood, Sarah Mitchell, proud pilot and champion of change. Now, if you've followed Sarah's incredible journey and are inspired by her transformation, you need to subscribe now. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second. Leave a like to help power our future stories and comment below with your thoughts and theories on Sarah's next steps. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to witness this powerful conclusion. Your action will make a difference.